On my 70th birthday, I walked into my daughter Sarah's backyard in suburban Atlanta, expecting a warm celebration, but found only a flimsy banner with my name misspelled and a family that barely noticed me. My grandson Ethan, 22 and full of venom, shattered the day when he slapped me across the face after a petty argument, his hands stinging as much as the silence that followed. Sarah froze, her husband Tom grabbed another beer, and my grandkids stared at their plates, complicit in their stillness. Humiliated, I clutched the $10 0 cents lottery ticket I'd bought on a whim and walked away, my heart in pieces. That night, alone in a motel, I scratched off that ticket and stared at $7 million, 0 cents. A fortune that felt like both a lifeline and a dare. What would you do if your family betrayed you and fate handed you a second chance? I didn't go back. Instead, I found Clara, Ethan's ex-wife, a single mom with a dream, and together we built something bolder than revenge. A coffee shop called Rise Again, where my silence became my loudest roar. The morning of my 70th birthday started with a flicker of hope, the kind that lingers in your chest even when you know better. I'd woken up early, the sunlight filtering through the faded curtains of my small apartment, and spent an hour kneading dough for my mother's cornbread recipe, the one Sarah used to beg for as a kid. I told myself it didn't matter that my birthdays had grown quieter over the years. Fewer cards, fewer. This was 70, a milestone, and surely Sarah would make it special. I slipped on my favorite blue cardigan, tucked the lottery ticket I'd bought at the gas station into my purse, and drove the 20 minutes to her house in a tidy Atlanta suburb where the lawns were manicured, but the air always felt a little too still. The ticket was a whim, a $10 0 cents treat to myself. After years of pinching pennies, a small rebellion against a life that had started to feel like a shadow of itself. I didn't expect much from it, just a fleeting thrill, but it sat in my purse like a secret whispering possibilities. When I pulled into Sarah's driveway, the scene was already wrong. The backyard was set up for a barbecue, but it looked thrown together like an afterthought. A folding table wobbled under plastic cups and a bowl of wilted potato salad. A dollar store banner hung crookedly on the fence proclaiming, "Happy 70th, Marta," in smudged marker. My name misspelled. A careless jab. Sarah was fussing with a cooler of sodas, her face tight with the kind of stress that comes from pretending everything's fine. Her husband, Tom, was already halfway through a six-pack, slurring opinions about the Braves game to no one in particular. My younger grandkids, Lila, 10, and Ben, 8, chased each other around a sagging inflatable pool, ignoring me as I set my cornbread on the table. Ethan, my oldest grandson at 22, sprawled in a lawn chair, his phone glued to his hand, earbuds in, the faint hiss of music leaking out. He barely looked up when I said, "Hey, Ethan, happy to see you." His grunt was all I got, and I swallowed the sting, telling myself to focus on the good. Maybe we'd sing happy birthday. Maybe Sarah had made my favorite pecan pie the way she did when she was little. The illusion held for about 15 minutes. I stood by the table, picking at a paper plate of chips, trying to smile through the awkward small talk with Sarah about her job at the insurance office. Tom interrupted with a loud joke about getting old, and I forced a laugh, though it felt like swallowing glass. Then Ethan's voice cut through the air, sharp and mean, as he yelled at Leela for spilling soda on his sneakers. "You're such a clumsy idiot," he snapped, standing up so fast his chair tipped. Lila's face crumpled and Ben froze, clutching a plastic cup. I stepped forward, my voice soft but firm, the way I used to calm them as kids. "Ethan, honey, let's keep it calm today. It's my birthday after all." I thought it was gentle enough, a plea for peace, but his head whipped around, eyes blazing with something I didn't recognize. Anger, maybe, or something darker. "You don't run this family anymore, Grandma," he spat, stepping closer. His words hit like a slap, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. His hand swung, fast and deliberate, cracking across my cheek with a sound that echoed in the still air. The sting was immediate, a hot bloom of pain that spread to my scalp. My paper plate tipped, a slice of chocolate cake, store-bought, dairy-filled, inedible to me, sliding to the grass. I stood there, frozen, my hand touching my cheek, waiting for someone to move, to speak, to do anything. Sarah went pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table, but she didn't say a word. Tom turned away, cracking open another beer with a pop that felt louder than it should have. Lila and Ben stared at their plates, their small faces blank, as if they'd been trained to look away. The silence stretched, sharp and suffocating, cutting deeper than Ethan's hand. I wasn't their grandmother in that moment, not Martha, not even a person, just a ghost they'd all agreed to ignore. I didn't scream or cry. I couldn't. My throat felt like it was closing, but my hands moved on their own, setting the plate on the table with a care that felt absurd. I reached into my purse, fingers brushing the lottery ticket, its edges worn from the morning's nervous fidgeting. It was my one small act of defiance that day, a silly purchase that felt like mine alone. I slid it deeper into the pocket, a quiet anchor, and said, "I'm going inside to rest." My voice sounded foreign, thin. No one stopped me. I walked through the sliding glass door, past the kitchen where Sarah's half-hearted decorations, a single balloon, a crumpled streamer, mocked the occasion. In the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, my cheek throbbing, my heart heavier than I could name. I waited, staring at the door, willing someone to knock, to say, "Mom, are you okay?" Or, "Ethan, apologize." But the house stayed quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the barbecue carrying on without me. An hour passed, maybe more. I don't know. Time felt like it was unraveling. Finally, I stood, grabbed my purse, and walked out the front door. No goodbyes, no glances back. My old sedan was parked a block away, and I slid into the driver's seat, the leather warm from the Georgia sun. I drove, not knowing where, until I saw a motel sign blinking vacancy in red neon, a beacon in the dusk. I paid cash for a room, the clerk barely looking up as he handed me a key. Inside, the room smelled of bleach and stale coffee, the air conditioner rattling like it was on its last breath. I locked the door, sat on the stiff bed, and pulled out the lottery ticket. My hands shook as I held it, not from excitement, but from the weight of what had just happened. I didn't scratch it yet, I couldn't. Instead, I stared at the wall, replaying Ethan's blank eyes, Sarah's frozen face, the way Tom's beer can glinted in the sun. I'd spent decades pouring myself into them. Gas money for Ethan, late night calls with Sarah, birthday cakes for Lila and Ben, and in one moment, I'd become nothing. The ticket in my hand felt like a question, a dare. What now, Martha? What now? I stayed in that room all night, the ticket untouched on the nightstand, its silver coating catching the dim light. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My cheek still burned, but it was the silence that kept me awake, the realization that I'd been fading in their eyes for years. I thought of Sarah as a girl, braiding my hair while I flipped pancakes, of Ethan calling me Nana when he was small enough to fit in my lap. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. By morning, the motel's thin curtains glowed with dawn, and I knew I wasn't going back. Not to that house, not to that life. The ticket was still there, waiting. I grabbed a quarter from my keychain, my hand steadier now, and scratched. The numbers appeared one by one, each a quiet shock. $7 million, 0 cents. I blinked, checked again, then laughed, a low, bitter sound that turned into sobs so deep I couldn't breathe. It wasn't the money that broke me, it was the truth it laid bare. I could leave. I could choose myself. And as the sun rose over the motel parking lot, I knew that's exactly what I'd do. The morning of my 70th birthday had crumbled into a nightmare, leaving me raw and reeling from Ethan's slap and the deafening silence of my family. Sarah's frozen stare, Tom's indifference, the kids' averted eyes. I'd walked away from Sarah's backyard in suburban Atlanta, my cheek burning, clutching a $10 0-cent lottery ticket I'd bought on a whim. A small rebellion against a life that had faded me into invisibility. In a motel room that smelled of bleach and broken dreams, I scratched off that ticket and stared at $7 million, 0 cents. A number that felt like both a lifeline and a challenge. I didn't scream or jump. I laughed, a jagged sound, then cried until my eyes stung, not for the money, but for the truth it exposed. I was nothing to them. That night, alone, I made a choice. I wasn't going back. I wrote a note to Sarah, mailed it on a diner napkin, and vanished into a new life. Then I found Clara, Ethan's ex-wife, a single mom with a toddler and a dream of a coffee shop, the only one who'd ever seen me as more than a shadow. Together, we'd build something new, something that screamed, I was still here. The motel room was a cocoon of stale air and flickering light, its thin walls doing little to muffle the hum of the highway outside. I sat by the window, a paper cup of weak coffee cooling in my hands, the lottery ticket on the nightstand like a talisman I was afraid to touch again. I checked the numbers 3 times, each scrape of the quarter confirming the impossible. $7 million, 0 cents. It didn't feel real, not yet. My cheeks still throbbed from Ethan's hand, but it was the silence that lingered sharper. Sarah's pale face, Tom's casual reach for another beer, the way Lila and Ben stared at their plates like they'd been taught to ignore pain. I'd spent years being their rock, their Nanan, the one who drove Ethan to his first job interview, who stayed up late sewing Lila's Halloween costume, who listened to Sarah's tearful calls when Tom's drinking got worse, and in one moment, I'd become a stranger, a ghost in my own family. The ticket wasn't just money. It was a door, one I could walk through or slam shut. I chose to walk. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going back to that house, to that life where I was furniture, not family. I sat at the motel's wobbly desk, the kind that smelled like old cigarette smoke, and scribbled a note on the back of a diner napkin I'd grabbed from the lobby. I'm safe, I wrote to Sarah. Don't look for me. I'm done. No signature, no explanation, just the truth, raw and final. I drove to a gas station down the road, slipped the note into a mailbox, and felt a weight lift. Not from forgiveness, but from release. The lottery office was my next call. My voice shook as I explained I wanted to claim the prize quietly, no press, no giant check. The woman on the phone, her voice calm and practiced, said, "We can set up a trust. You'd be surprised how many want it this way." I muttered, "Not as surprised as you think," and hung up, my hands still trembling. I wasn't rich yet, not in my bones. I was just a 70-year-old woman with a bruised cheek and a chance to start over. I needed to disappear, at least for a while. I bought a burner phone and a cheap laptop at a strip mall, paying cash to avoid leaving a trail. At the next motel, I checked in as Ellen May, my grandmother's name, a nod to the woman who taught me how to knead cornbread and stand tall. The money hit the trust account 5 days later, a quiet transfer that changed everything and nothing. I didn't feel like a millionaire. I felt tired, hollow, like I'd been running from something my whole life and only now noticed. I ate vending machine crackers and watched late-night reruns of courtroom dramas, the kind where justice always seemed to win. But my mind kept circling back to Sarah's silence, Ethan's blank stare, the way Tom's beer can glinted like a weapon. I wondered if they'd read my note yet, if Sarah had cried, if Ethan even cared. The questions didn't have answers, but they led me somewhere unexpected. One sleepless night, I opened the burner phone and scrolled Instagram, something I rarely did. I tapped through accounts of small-town bakeries and coffee shops, a habit from years ago when I dreamed of opening one myself. Before my husband's illness, before the bills piled up, before life became a series of sacrifices. That's when I saw her, Clara, Ethan's ex-wife, standing in a cramped kitchen, flour dusting her cheeks, holding a tray of cinnamon rolls. Her caption read, "Dreaming of a coffee shop. One day." I stopped, my thumb hovering over the screen. Clara had always been kind, even after Ethan left her. She'd brought me chicken soup when I had the flu, called me Miss Martha, even after the divorce. When they split, Sarah and Tom acted like Clara had never existed, erasing her from family dinners, from photos, from memory. But I remembered her. She'd seen me, really seen me, when no one else did. I opened the messages and typed, "Still dreaming of that coffee shop?" My heart pounded as I hit send, like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Clara didn't reply right away, and I didn't expect her to. A vague message from a burner account wasn't exactly trustworthy. I kept refreshing her page, staring at her tired but hopeful smile, the way she wrote about her daughter Ava and her dreams of a cozy shop with pecan lattes and honey biscuits. 2 days later, her response came. "Who's this?" I hesitated, then typed, "It's Martha, Ethan's grandmother. I'm safe. Can we talk? I'm in Savannah." I waited another day, my stomach in knots, until she sent an address for a cafe near her apartment and a time. Thursday, 2 p.m. I got there early, my hands shaking so badly I spilled tea on the table before she arrived. When Clara walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was pulled back tight, dark circles under her eyes, her toddler Ava asleep in her arms. She looked at me, wary, like she was waiting for a cat. "It's really me," I said, and her shoulders softened just a fraction. She slid into the booth, Ava's small body curled against her, and said, "What happened, Miss Martha?" I told her everything. The slap, the silence, the ticket, the $7 million 0 cents. I didn't sugarcoat it, didn't hold back the way my cheek burned or how Sarah's stillness cut deeper than Ethan's hand. Clara listened, her eyes widening at the money, then narrowing as she processed the rest. She didn't interrupt, just nodded, her fingers brushing Ava's hair. When I finished, she asked, "Why me?" Her voice was quiet, like she was afraid of the answer. I looked at her, at the woman who'd been cast out by my family just like I had, and said, "Because you saw me when they didn't. You brought me soup when I was sick, even when Ethan told you to stay away. You dreamed of something better, and I want to help you build it." Her lip trembled and she looked away, like hope was too heavy to hold. Then she whispered, "You're serious?" I nodded. "As serious as that ticket." We sat there, two women carrying too many scars, and something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a spark of possibility. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the first step toward Rise Again, toward a life louder than the silence I'd left behind. The motel room, with its stale coffee scent and rattling air conditioner, had become my refuge after Ethan's slap and my family's silence shattered my 70th birthday. I'd scratched a $10 0 cents lottery ticket and found $7 million 0 cents, a lifeline that pushed me to leave Sarah's house in suburban Atlanta for good. I mailed her a note, "I'm safe, don't look for me, I'm done," and vanished, checking into motels as Ellen May, The money didn't feel like wealth, it felt like a chance to reclaim myself. Scrolling Instagram one restless night, I found Clara, Ethan's ex-wife, a 30-year-old single mom dreaming of a coffee shop. Her kindness, soup, left on my porch when I was sick, had stayed with me, unlike my family's erasure of her after the divorce. I messaged her, met her in a Savannah cafe, and told her everything, the slap, the ticket. When I offered to fund her dream, her eyes softened with disbelief. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you saw me," I said. That spark of connection lit a fire, and together we began building Rise Again, a coffee shop that wasn't just a business, but a defiance of everything that had tried to break us. Clara and I didn't waste time. We sat in that cafe, Ava dozing in her lap, and started dreaming out loud. Clara pulled out a worn notebook, pages filled with sketches of menus, pecan lattes, honey biscuits, peach cobbler bars, scribbled in the margins of her life as a part-time barista. Her hands shook as she showed me, like she was afraid to believe this was real. I knew that fear, the kind that comes from years of being told, "You're not enough. We'll call it Rise Again," she said, her voice steadying like coffee, waking you up, like us, getting back up. I smiled so hard my cheeks ached, the first real smile since that awful birthday. We found a storefront 2 blocks from a community college in Savannah, a former laundromat with chipped paint and big windows that let in the kind of light that felt like hope. The rent was cheap, the kitchen spacious enough for Clara's ambition. I signed the lease with cash from the trust, my hands steady now, and we got to work. I was 70, learning things I never thought I'd need: how to file for permits, set up payroll, negotiate with suppliers for flour and coffee beans. Clara threw herself into recipe testing, her tiny apartment kitchen a chaos of sugar and spice, Ava napping on a blanket dusted with flour. I drive over after motel check-ins, balancing budgets on Clara's wobbly table while she perfected a cinnamon biscuit that made my mouth water. Every step felt like peeling back layers of myself I'd buried. Under bills, under grief for my late husband, under years of being Nana to a family that stopped seeing me. Clara, too, was coming alive. She'd been called too soft, too dreamer by Ethan and Sarah, but in that kitchen, she was a force, tweaking recipes until they sang. Ava became our unofficial mascot, toddling around with a toy spatula, giggling as she helped mix batter. One night, Clara burned a batch of scones, laughed, and said, "We're learning, Miss Martha." I nodded, my throat tight. We weren't just building a coffee shop. We were building a home. The work was grueling but electric. I spent mornings on my laptop watching YouTube tutorials to fix a leaky sink or understand tax codes, things I never imagined at my age. Clara stayed up past midnight, testing peach glazes, her eyes bright with a purpose I hadn't seen in her before. We scoured thrift stores for tables and chairs, mismatched but sturdy, and bought used espresso machines from a closing diner. Painted the walls a warm yellow, the color of my mother's kitchen, while Clara hand-lettered a chalkboard menu. We argued over small things: too much cinnamon in the biscuits, whether to offer decaf, but it was the kind of arguing that felt like love, like we were both all in. Ava's laughter filled the gaps, her tiny hands leaving flowery prints on my jeans. I taught her to fold napkins, her chubby fingers fumbling but proud. "You're a natural, Ava," I'd say, and Clara would smile, her eyes saying what words didn't. "Thank you for believing in us." Rise Again started to take shape, its bones coming together like a puzzle we didn't know we were solving. The storefront's windows gleamed after we scrubbed them clean, and the smell of fresh paint mixed with Clara's test batches of coffee. We hung a wooden sign outside, "Rise Again," carved in bold letters, gold paint catching the sun. It wasn't fancy, not like the chain cafes downtown, but it was ours. Honest, warm, real. I remember standing in the empty shop one evening, the counters bare, the ovens cold, and feeling something I hadn't in years: pride. Not the loud kind, but the quiet sort that settles in your chest like a warm drink. I wasn't just funding Clara's dream, I was reclaiming mine, one I'd buried under decades of putting others first. I looked at Clara, who was wiping down a counter, humming softly, and thought, she was never the problem. They were. The soft opening came faster than we expected, a quiet Saturday with no fanfare, just a sign that said "open" and a hope that someone would show. They did. Not a crowd, but enough. A teacher from the college ordered a pecan latte and smiled after the first sip. A nurse grabbed a honey biscuit for her break and said, "This tastes like my grandma's." A retired couple lingered, asking Clara about her recipes, their eyes crinkling with warmth. I worked the register, my hands clumsy on the new system, but every thank you from a customer felt like a stitch in a wound I hadn't named. Clara moved like she'd been born in that kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, her smile brighter than I'd ever seen. Ava sat on a stool, offering imaginary cookies to anyone who'd play along. The air smelled of coffee and burnt sugar, and for the first time since that awful birthday, I felt seen. Not as Nana, not as Martha, but as someone who mattered. That night, after we locked up, Clara and I sat on milk crates in the back, splitting a leftover biscuit. "We did it," she said, her voice soft but sure. I nodded, my throat too full to speak. I hadn't thought about Ethan in days, or Sarah's silence, or Tom's beer cans. They were fading, not gone but distant, like a song you can't quite hear anymore. Rise Again wasn't just a coffee shop. It was a declaration, a space where we could be whole again. I looked at Clara, at Ava asleep on a blanket nearby, and felt something stronger than anger or pain. Purpose. We'd built something good, not out of spite, but in spite of everything. And as I sipped my coffee, the cup warm in my hands, I knew this was only the beginning. The world outside, Ethan, Sarah, the past, would find us soon enough. But for now, in this small, flower-dusted kingdom, we were rising, and no one could take that away. The air in Rise Again, our Savannah coffee shop, still smelled of fresh paint and warm biscuits, a testament to the dream Clara and I had built from the ashes of my 70th birthday betrayal. Ethan's slap and my family's silence, Sarah's frozen stare, Tom's indifference, the kids' averted eyes, had driven me from their Atlanta backyard, clutching a $10 0 cents lottery ticket that turned into $7 million 0 cents in a motel room. I'd chosen to vanish, mailing Sarah a note. I'm safe. Don't look for me. I'm done. I found Clara, Ethan's ex-wife, a 30-year-old single mom whose kindness had never wavered, and together we created Rise Again, a coffee shop that was more than a business. It was our defiance, our home. Clara's recipes and Ava's giggles filled the space with life, and I'd learned to navigate permits and payroll at 70, feeling seen for the first time in years. Our soft opening brought smiles from locals, their thank yous stitching up old wounds. But the past doesn't stay buried. A blurry photo of me pouring coffee hit a food blog, and Ethan's rage followed, turning our sanctuary into a battleground. As his lies spread, we faced a choice: crumble or keep serving. It started with a ping on Clara's phone, a sound that cut through the morning hum of the espresso machine. She was restocking Honey Biscuits, her apron dusted with flour, when her face tightened. A food blog posted about us, she said, holding out her phone. My stomach sank as I saw the post. A glowing review of our pecan lattes and Clara's story. But there I was, blurry in the background, holding a tray, near the back door. The blogger hadn't asked permission, hadn't known the weight of that image. I tried to breathe through it, telling myself no one would notice me from that angle. But deep down, I knew better. Ethan was always watching, waiting for a chance to twist the knife. Within hours, he'd messaged our business account. I know she's there. This is betrayal. She's using you to get back at us. His words were venom, each one a reminder of the slap, the silence, the family that let me fade. Clara's hands shook as she showed me, her jaw clenched. I'm blocking him, she said. I touched her arm. Not yet. Let's see what he does. Part of me hoped for an apology, a crack in his anger. I was wrong. Ethan didn't stop at messages. By noon the next day, he was outside, pacing the sidewalk in a worn hoodie, his phone raised, filming a live video. This is the place, he said, his voice carrying through the open window. Built with stolen money, funded by my grandmother's betrayal. She replaced us with strangers. Customers inside froze, their coffee cups hovering mid-sip. A young couple slipped out, heads down, avoiding the scene. An older woman at the counter whispered to her friend, "Is that true?" Clara's eyes met mine, her face pale but steady. "Call the police?" she asked. I shook my head. "We keep serving," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. We moved faster, pouring lattes, bagging biscuits, our smiles thin but unbroken. Ethan didn't come inside, just paced for 20 minutes, muttering into his phone, then peeled out in his dented sedan, leaving a cloud of exhaust and a toppled chalkboard sign. I stepped outside to pick it up and saw the words scrawled in black marker. She abandoned her family for this. I wiped it off with my sleeve, the sting of those words sharper than I'd admit. The fallout came fast. Sarah called the shop's number that afternoon, leaving voicemails that started with, "Mom, is this you?" and ended with, "You can't just disappear like this. Please call me." Her voice cracked, heavy with guilt, but I couldn't listen, not yet. The wound of her silence at the barbecue was still raw, a bruise I pressed every time I thought of her. Then came the podcast, some low-budget show called Family Secrets Uncovered, hosted by one of Ethan's old drinking buddies. Clara found it first, playing a clip on her phone as we cleaned the shop after closing. Ethan's voice was smooth, practiced, cracking just enough to sound wounded. She raised us, you know. I drove her to the store, helped with bills. Then she wins millions and vanishes. Funds my ex-wife's revenge cafe. Sick. The host laughed, egging him on. Every word was a lie. I'd been the one giving him gas money, waiting outside the DMV for him, buying groceries when his card bounced. But in his story, I was the villain, a greedy grandmother who traded family for a vendetta. Clara's eyes burned as she paused the clip. He's lying, she said. I nodded, hollow. Let him. Lies don't last. The lies spread anyway. Our Instagram page, once filled with photos of Ava giggling and Clara's perfect biscuits, started getting hate. Shame on you for tearing a family apart. Hope karma hits hard. Each comment was a needle, pricking the peace we'd built. I wanted to scream the truth, to flood the internet with my side, but Clara stopped me. Let them talk, she said, her voice steady. We keep serving. So we did. I kneaded dough with hands that shook, poured coffee with a smile that felt like a mask. Every customer who stayed, who smiled back, felt like a small victory. But the weight of Ethan's words lingered, a fog that clung to every corner of Rise Again. I started waking up at 3 a.m., staring at the motel ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake, if I should have answered Sarah's calls, if I'd been too quick to burn my old life down. Then something shifted. A woman in her 60s walked in one morning carrying a jar of homemade peach jam. Her hair was gray, her voice soft. I saw the news, she said, setting the jar on the counter. I know who you are, Martha. Thank you for not giving up. She didn't linger, just paid for a coffee and left. But her words cracked something open in me. The next day, a veteran dropped off a handwritten card. Keep rising, lady. A college student, barely 20, came in teary-eyed, saying, my grandma deserves better too. You're my hero. They didn't just buy coffee, they stayed, shared stories, posted photos with captions like support Rise Again and this place is home. The hate comments didn't stop, but they were drowned out by support, by people who saw us. Really saw us. Our line grew, snaking around the block on weekends, locals and strangers alike, drawn to the warmth of our shop, to Clara's biscuits, to the story of two women who refused to break. One evening after closing, Clara and I sat in the empty shop, the air still sweet with burnt sugar. Ava was asleep on a pile of aprons, her tiny snores softening the silence. They're coming around, Clara said, scrolling through new messages of support. I nodded, my throat tight. The fight wasn't over. Ethan's lies still echoed, Sarah's voicemail still waited, but we were stronger than I'd ever imagined. Rise Again wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, a testament to what we could build when we chose ourselves. I looked at Clara, at the shop we'd poured our hearts into, and felt a quiet fire. The past was loud, but we were louder, and no podcast or scrawled sign could take that away. The battle for Rise Again, our Savannah coffee shop, had been fierce after Ethan's lies spread like wildfire. His podcast rants and scrawled accusations, calling me a traitor who'd abandoned my family for a revenge cafe, had shaken us. But Clara and I kept serving, fueled by the growing support of strangers who saw our truth. A woman's homemade jam, a veteran's card, a student's tears, they'd turned our shop into a beacon. Its line wrapping around the block, I had left Sarah's Atlanta backyard on my 70th birthday, stung by Ethan's slap and her silence, and found $7 million, 0 cents in a lottery ticket that became my lifeline. With Clara, Ethan's ex-wife, and her daughter Ava, we'd built Rise Again, a defiance of the family that erased me. But the past wasn't done with us. Sarah's voicemails begged for answers and Ethan's anger loomed. Yet, as we prepared for the grand opening, I found a peace stronger than pain, a victory in choosing myself. Sarah appeared one Tuesday unannounced, standing outside Rise Again in a faded jacket, her shoulders hunched like she was bracing for a storm. Clara saw her first, nodding toward the window before taking Ava to the back, giving me space I didn't know I needed. I stepped outside, dish towel in hand, my heart pounding like I was 20 again, facing a scolding. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, her voice breaking, her eyes older than her 45 years. I didn't hug her, didn't cry, just said, "Want coffee?" We sat at a corner table, chamomile steaming between us. She stared at her cup, then spoke. "I froze that day when Ethan hit you. I should have stopped him. Then you were gone and the tick at the shop, it all snowballed." Her words trembled, heavy with regret. I told her the slap stung, but her silence broke me. She nodded, tears falling, and said Ethan was unraveling, drinking, broke, blaming me. "He says you chose Clara over us," she whispered. I shook my head. "I chose dignity over denial." She laughed, a brittle sound, and said, "I wish I had your strength. I saw my daughter then, the girl who sang off-key in my kitchen, but forgiveness wasn't mine to give yet." She left with a quiet, "The door's open, Mom." I said thank you and meant it, even if I wasn't ready to walk through. The grand opening came on a sunny May Saturday. Our sign bold, "Rise Again," brewed strong, built stronger. The crowd was electric. Families, students, retirees, drawn by Clara's biscuits and our story. Ethan lurked across the street, glaring, but I didn't flinch. We served every customer, smiles wide, Ava handing out napkins like a tiny ambassador. A reporter asked for my side. I said, "The coffee's hot, the truth hotter, taste it." That night, I wrote Ethan a letter on a scrap of paper. "I didn't leave because you hit me. I left because you thought you could, and no one said no. You weren't replaced. You walked away, build something, don't break it." I signed it Nana, a name he'd forgotten, and left it at the counter for him. Then I joined Clara outside, where Ava chased fireflies, her giggles lighting the dusk. We sat on a bench, coffee cups in hand, the air sweet with possibility. I wasn't bitter anymore. Rise Again was my home, my heart, proof I was more than their silence. As I watched Ava dance, I knew I'd won. Not revenge, but a life that roared louder than their betrayal.